targeting human trafficking in Pima County.
We're going to throw the book at you. We're going to come at you hard and see to it that you not do that to anyone else.
Plus, congressional representatives back in Arizona on recess and sounding off on what's happening in the nation's capital.
We shouldn't be playing politics with national security or border security, and we certainly shouldn't be jerking around hardworking individuals that put on the uniform every day because of our bickering between the branches.
This is Arizona Week. Human trafficking is quickly becoming an international headline, and it's no different in Arizona, where just this week, Pima County declared its opposition. Here's Chief Deputy Chris Nanos from the Pima County Sheriff's Department.
When you think of human trafficking, so many of us believe that it's this pimp hanging on the corner with these little girls around him, or they think it's the evil guy who's going searching online and finding it through websites and that. And all of those may be practical and may be happening, and they are concerning. But the bigger issue to me is that we have 300,000 kids in this nation who are victims of human trafficking, sexual labor, and that should stop. And we should be able to find a way to I'm a realist. I know we'll never stop at all, but we've got to find a way to be aggressive and attack it.
You were describing the uniqueness of Pima County being here along the interstate and then the proximity to the border.
It's trafficking. Human smuggling deals with getting those into across the borders or into areas they're not supposed to be, and the trafficking gets them across the country. Let's face it, we're right here on the border, and we also major interstate. So I'm sure it's impacted somewhat through to that end. But it's not just the migrant worker. It's not just the migrant. Like I said, 83% of those found to be victims in this. I think there was a Department of Justice study from 2008, 2010, and they found 83% of those involved in human trafficking were U.S. citizens. So is it a migrant issue? Absolutely. We hear about it. We see the suffering of those who come across. They get robbed, they get beaten, they get raped, victimized, and they get put into slavery. You know, that's really yeah, I can't even imagine saying that word. And that's something. 150 years ago, we abolished slavery through the 13th Amendment, and here we are today, still struggling with it.
You said this is a male-female issue, and it's also an issue within families.
I'm more focused on the victim services. I get the zero tolerance, arrest bad guys, put them away, lock them up. That we can deal with. That's the easy part. I want to know, what are we doing with the kids afterwards? How do we take care of them so that they don't get back into that trade, into that business, a life that's the only life they know? Like I say, it's a very complex issue. If you drill down into it, you'll see that there's a lot of these kids who do not believe they're victims, who feel as though they're doing what they know. And so how do we change that thinking, that there's more value to them, there's a better life ahead for them? We've just got to get them the resources so that they can see that.
There are families out there, parents who are saying, this will never happen to me and my family.
I'm glad they think that way, but it's more importantly that they take some action to make sure it doesn't happen that way. I say the same. It's not going to happen to me, but now what am I going to do to stop it and prevent it? A lot of these kids are just the runaways and throwaways of society, and that's why we need to start providing some services to these young kids and their families when we are done. Arresting a bad guy and putting him in prison and prosecuting him and all of that, that's the easy part. It's what do we do with that victim and her family or his family to get them the services and get them back into society, get them back to some sort of normalcy. And it's hard. It's not an easy task.
You believe a task force is long overdue. I mean, this is something that cannot be ignored any longer.
Why would we tolerate that? Who would tolerate the abuse of your most vulnerable?
Family and others.
I know they've made a proclamation, but I didn't need a piece of paper to say that. We know it. As a society, as a community in Tucson, we know we're not going to let you harm our most vulnerable. It's not going to happen. We're not going to stand for that. And so absolutely, if you've done something like that, we're gonna throw the book at you. We're gonna come at you hard and see to it that you not do that to anyone else.
That proclamation spurred by Representative Martha McSally, the CD2 Republican back in her district this week, and made time to visit with Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover. They spoke in length about a federal judge's efforts to stop President Obama's executive order on immigration.
The president 22 times said that he didn't have the authority to do what he did, and then he did it. So it looks like a judge has agreed that the president has overreached on this issue. But from my perspective, the way for us to solve this is for Congress to actually solve the problem ourselves. So there's a border security element, and then there's a legal immigration modernization issue that I'm trying to find like-minded colleagues to move these things forward, because I agree the president has overreached and overstepped, but the best thing that we can do in Congress is actually solve the problem ourselves, because it is our job to do it.
Talking about that, as we said, you had almost 24 members of Congress down here. The bill was moving at that point. You got back to Washington a couple of days later. The whole thing stalled. What can you tell our viewers about what they may not know about why it stalled and what the process is? Is that bill dead? Is it still going?
I hope it's not dead. It better not be dead. Look, this is a Secure Our Borders First Act, and I would say most of my colleagues even campaigned that we need to secure our border first as we move things forward to address some of the other more challenging issues. So I'm going to continue to be a voice out there that is asking my colleagues to get on board, because we should not be playing politics with border security. This is a public safety issue. It's a potential national security issue, and we've got members in our district, Southern Arizona, ranchers, border residents, that are dealing still with the fact that we've got cartels trafficking over their land and through their neighborhoods, while Washington, D.C. is bickering about how to move forward in this. So it's definitely not dead, but we've got to bring our colleagues along to do what we all said we were going to do, which is secure the border first. So I'm continuing to work with my colleagues and work with Chairman McCall and work with the leadership to build the case to get this thing across the finish line, not just in the House, but also we got to get through the Senate and get it implemented.
The judge's order holding up the executive order of the president, does that help or hinder the argument to get that DHS funding bill before Homeland Security funding runs out at the end of the month? Does it help get it through, or is it just part of the process?
I think it's part of the process. I mean, we've got 3 branches of government and we've got checks and balances there. So the one branch is overreached, which is the executive branch. The second branch, the judicial, has stepped in. It appears to be initially, at least, to stay that order. And the third branch has a job to do to make sure that we secure our nation from threats to our homeland, which is what the Department of Homeland Security does. But we also do our job to be a check and balance on the president. So as we're moving up to the end of the funding, I will tell you it's my commitment that we shouldn't be playing politics with securing our homeland. Also, I've got so many members of the Homeland Security Department that I represent that are my constituents, those that are working in border security or ICE or TSA, different elements that are here in Southern Arizona, who are very concerned about uncertainty going forward as to whether they're going to be told to go on the job and not get paid, what these implications are. So it's my commitment again that we need to be a check and balance on the president, but we shouldn't be playing politics with national security or border security, and we certainly shouldn't be jerking around hardworking individuals that put on the uniform every day because of our bickering between the branches. So Congress needs to do its job to solve these problems, to secure the border, to revamp and modernize the legal immigration system, and to address some of these other harder issues that the president has overreached on.
Congress has been out this week. You've been lucky enough to be home in beautiful Southern Arizona,
awesome,
as opposed to snowy Washington for the last week. But what are you hearing? Is a shutdown realistic at this point? Obviously, the House has already passed the funding.
Right.
It's over in the Senate, but what are you hearing?
Well, I think there's 3 different options going forward. One is that we pass a funding bill and continue to fund Homeland Security through the end of the fiscal year. A second option might be a short-term kick the can. And a third option could be that the funding runs out. Again, I stand committed to provide that check and balance to the president is overreach. but not playing politics with the Department of Homeland Security and those that are putting on the uniform to keep us safe and secure. So I am continuing to work with my colleagues to be a voice that we're going to solve the problem, we're going to be that check and balance, but also we can yell at the president, we can try and use the elements we have to stop his overreach, but I think the best thing that we can do as Congress when we say this is not his job, this is Congress's job. So the best thing that we can do is actually do our job to secure the border, modernize the legal immigration system, and address these challenges moving forward.
Let's talk about an issue that often is tied to illegal border crossers. Yeah. This week you received from the Pima County Board of Supervisors a proclamation declaring Pima County a zero-tolerance zone for human trafficking. The Arizona legislature has passed some bills this week and last year on it. You have 3 bills in Congress on it. This is becoming a really big issue.
It is. Actually, we passed 12 bills out of the House a few weeks ago on the issue, and I think it just shows that the awareness level is going up. Oftentimes people think trafficking is something that happens in Asia or Africa, and even when they think about it in a border community, they think it's the majority of people being trafficked across the border from other countries, but the reality is the vast majority, somewhere between 85 to 90% that are trafficked for labor or sex trafficking are American citizens. They're in our neighborhood. They're vulnerable, usually young people, vulnerable youth, individuals that are either in group homes or runaways. They're the ones that are being scooped up by these traffickers who are preying upon them in the sex industry and in forced labor. And I think the awareness is definitely going up that this problem is in our community and we need to do something about it. This is not a partisan issue. This is something that is an absolute travesty that's happening in our communities, and sports events, gem show, those types of things actually attract more activity. So we've got to work together in order to clamp down on this and help the victims.
Let's change gears very quickly. A federal issue that popped up, for lack of a better term, this week, the end of the open enrollment period, the latest one for the Affordable Care Act. We're still waiting on final numbers, but those numbers are still going up. Does that say we need something if it's repealed or tweaked, or is this something that we're going to continue to have?
Well, I think we can all agree that it's good for people to have health insurance who previously didn't have it, and that people with pre-existing conditions can get coverage, and that people that are, the working poor are able to get the health care that they need. We can all agree on that. The issue is, how do we do that doesn't impact economic growth, that doesn't have about $1 trillion of taxes and penalties, and doesn't rob from Medicare, right? So as we move this forward, sometimes the debate is, you're either signing up people or you have some other alternative that's opposite of that, and that's just not true. I mean, look, the Affordable Care Act appears to be signing up these people, but at what cost to economic development? There's also other stories of people who have lost their health insurance or no longer can afford their doctor, or deductibles are so high they can't get the care that they need, and they end up in the emergency room. And I've done visits on a Friday night to the emergency room, and I'm seeing these type of implications. Or small businesses in our community that are cutting people's hours to part-time or laying people off because of the magnitude of the implications. So where we are going forward, we have a Supreme Court case that I think is going to be interesting to see how this plays out. There's a chance that by June, the major part of what makes Obamacare work is going to be potentially ruled against. So I am a part of, again, a group of people within my party who wants to have thoughtful solutions moving forward that replaces Obamacare with something that keeps choices between doctors and patients, that allows people with pre-existing conditions to get covered, that's not a one-size-fits-all based on taxes, mandates, penalties, and robbing Medicare, allows transparency and cost, and helps those who can't afford health care actually get the subsidized or the care that they need, but does it in a way that brings the cost of health care down, which is not what this particular bill does right now. It hasn't even addressed the cost of health care at all. So look, these are complex issues, and I'm working with thought leaders in the healthcare community, but we have got to have some solutions going forward, because again, we don't need hardworking individuals in our community to be caught in the balance of political bickering in Washington, D.C. So we've got to make sure, especially if the Supreme Court case is ruled on, that there's a smooth transition or off-ramp to a suitable alternative that preserves those principles I mentioned.
All right, well, thank you for taking a few minutes to talk with us.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate it.
Also in Arizona this week, Representative Raul Grijalva, the CD3 Democrat in his 7th term in Congress, he too thinks delayed immigration talks will present a challenge to Congress.
That injunction that the Obama administration has to respect, and so you suspend the activities that have been going on up to this point. You unfortunately suspend the whole criteria on deportations. Those people that potentially could be eligible won't have that delay until you know their qualification. And it's another obstacle in what has been a trail of obstacles on the issue of immigration reform. It's pretty evident Congress will do nothing about the issue in terms of passing reform in a comprehensive way or even in a piecemeal way. What we see now, and so many of us early on began to urge the president when it was pretty clear to us, or at least to myself, that Congress was not going to do anything about it. Pressing him to use the same authority used with the Dreamers on DACA to extend that to families and to those that qualify, potentially 5 million. And immediately states joined in. Arizona was one of the 20 plus states and shopped for a judge. And they found one in South Texas who has a predisposition and a history of decisions that have been basically against the authority of the president. Comments like this influx is the largest criminal influx in our country potentially. Some really harsh comments around the children's issue that happened in that part of the country, and the predisposition through comments and other opinions. It's unfortunate. It's another obstacle. We're urging the president to immediately appeal, and that you deal with the constitutionality. Very cleverly, this judge did not deal with the constitutionality of the authority the president has to issue this executive order. He did with the procedural issues around the law, that it's a financial burden on Texas, and because of where the state is, Arizona is part of it, that it's a financial burden on the state. And this is a fee exclusive process. The cost attendant with issuing driver's license, which Arizona already lost in court, those are all part of a fee process. Even the example he uses, I mean, you don't go get a license and give it to you for free. There's a cost attendant as a cost recovery thing. So it's very narrow. Time to do it on a date when the deportation criteria, the new one, would go into effect. It's unfortunate. It's another obstacle. But I've told people this is, this is no time to wring our hands, give up. The sky is falling. That this calls for a resolve. At the end of the day, I'm so confident that the constitutionality will be upheld, and that's the legal test. Once done, then we can proceed with making sure people show up.
It's almost an administrative technicality that he's operating under. So I guess what does this mean for this so-called government shutdown for the Department of Homeland Security that we may see next week?
That's a tough little nest that the Republican leadership has gotten themselves into. The Senate has said we can pass something without the House's poison amendments, and which said defund any executive action the president might take on immigration, plus get rid of DACA. I mean, a variety of every punitive thing they could add to that, they did. And the president said, I'm going to veto it if you bring it to me that way. So here's a stalemate. Now, here we have a majority in the House that the whole issue on immigration for them is security. And here they are holding up potentially the Homeland Security that extends beyond just the issue of immigration, holding up that funding and potentially beginning to shut down portions of it. Very dangerous game to play with the security of the country. Do a clean bill. We've always done it that way. Do a clean bill, and if we want to tackle the issue of immigration, bring that issue up. But to attach it to a must-pass piece of legislation is skirting the real issue here, which are jeopardizing security. What does the judge's injunction do? Does it give people a way out now to say, well, a judge has stopped it, therefore we can pass a clean bill? I don't know. I don't know if they think that much in depth. They're making a political statement, and I don't think they're going to let that political statement go easily.
And we should note that the Border Patrol, Customs, those offices would not be closed, but it's more administrative roles.
The essentials, the essential functions, the law enforcement function is not going to go away. Okay. What begins to be shuttered is the gathering of intelligence, the administrative procedures process, those people seeking to get citizenship, those people finishing their legal permanent residence status through the normal process. Those kinds of functions, which are essential to the boots on the ground function of Border Patrol, begins to get lost. Inspectors who are longer waits at the border. I think all that begins to add up. I just think that it's Russian roulette. Who's going to blink first? And at the end of the day, there's going to be blame. And I think that blame is going to fall squarely on the leadership in the House.
Other news in Washington this week, the Affordable Care Act, 10 million people signing up so far. And you agree with this program. You think it's a good thing for this country.
Yeah, I do. One can argue that it could have gone further. It could have had a public option. It could have done a lot of things. But the fact remains that now you have up to 11 to 12 million people that were formerly uninsured, now part of a health network, going to a hospital to be cared for, doing preventive care, no pre-existing conditions. Kids can be on that with their parents till they're 22, 23. And all those are big pluses, and I think people are responding to it. The next hurdle is going to be the fines begin to kick in. I'm glad they extended it. The fines begin to kick into individuals that choose not to, or businesses that should and don't. And there's going to be talk about waiving that requirement. I think if there's an extension to allow people more time to comply with the law, as there is right now, then that's fine. But to permanently waive a requirement that's actually the motivation, I think that's a mistake. If businesses need more time to comply, I think we should give them more time to comply. But if big corporations, especially the fast food industry, want more time, but they don't want to comply, then I don't think we should extend that olive branch.
All right. You had mentioned a new Republican-controlled Congress. This is your 7th term. How are things working out so far?
Well, the odds are certainly not in our favor, but I think the responsibility of Democrats is not try to be Republican light. They got to be Democrats, and I think we have to present alternatives to the legislation they're promoting that have content, they have intelligence, and they have appeal to the American people. In the past, we've been very good no votes. I think we have to be a very intelligent and smart opposition to what's being done. I don't think the American people just like the idea, oh, he voted no. I think I've always been about the business that you should provide an alternative. To the whole economic income equality, we need to have an alternative. We need to have a budget that speaks to the insecurities of the American people right now. You know, when the 70+% of the American people polled feel that their children's life is not going to be better than theirs, that's the first time it's happened in the history of this country. That's an anxiety. That's a frustration. Democrats felt it in this last elections, and I think we felt it because we had no economic message. We need to have one. I think we're going to have a really strong one. This is the biggest majority since 1929 for the Republicans. And I see a silver lining, though. Right after that, we had FDR and a string of progressive and enlightened policies that have carried this country up to this point. So maybe that's also a good symbol.
You're hopeful history repeats itself.
I'm not only hopeful, I'm prayerful that it repeats itself.
All right, Representative Grijalva, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Buzz now with my colleague Christopher Conover. Christopher spoke with Representative McSally and also Senator John McCain this week.
We went up to Phoenix, caught up with Senator McCain as he was doing some other events. The big issue in Washington, of course, coming up is the potential shutdown for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Their budget runs out at the end of this month, which happens to be next Friday. I asked him if he expected a vote by the end of the week to keep that agency running.
I'm hopeful it will get the vote, but also I am very pleased that the court, the federal judge, has said that none of these executive orders made by the president is constitutional, just as the president 22 times said it wasn't constitutional. So I'm hoping that we can have it go through the courts. I don't think it's a good idea for us to shut down the Department of Homeland Security.
He also addressed the issue of that executive order, which has been delayed for now, at least temporarily.
He mentioned it as we saw there. He's happy that the judge has put the president's executive actions on immigration on hold temporarily at the very least. Some have hoped that that would move the budget for Homeland Security along because there's language in the budget that zero funds or strips the money from the president's executive order. I asked him if he'd spoken with his colleagues about pulling that language out, which seems to be the logjam to moving that budget forward.
I've had some initial conversations, but we haven't come to a conclusion yet. But it's clear that a federal judge, and I believe it'll be upheld by the United States Supreme Court, acted in an unconstitutional fashion. 22 times the president himself said it would be unconstitutional before he did it.
So the big question, Lorraine and everyone else, is will we get a budget? Republicans have said, some of them, McCain not being one of them, that they're fine with a Homeland Security shutdown. Others, Democrats, have said that they don't want that to happen. At this point, we're in kind of a wait-and-see mode.
All right, on to another subject now. There was a clarification we need to make regarding last week's program about what's happening within the State Department of Education. Now, what occurred was that Superintendent of Public Instruction Diane Douglas fired 2 staff members of the State Board of Education. So what's new this week?
What's new this week is after a week of back and forth last week, these 2 staff members, the executive director and the assistant executive director, are back on the job. Now, Douglas sent a letter to their attorney spelling out how they could do their jobs and that they answered to Douglas. The attorney for the Board of Education responded, no, they don't answer to you, they answer to the board, they are staff members. There was a little bit of back and forth, and now it's all quieted down. Neither attorney is saying, neither attorney for either Diane Douglas or the board is saying what was worked out. They're just saying these 2 women are at work, they're doing their jobs, and they're working through the issue.
All right, probably more to come on that in the next few weeks.
Much more to come.
All right, Christopher Conover, thank you. And thank you for joining us. That's our program. For all of us here at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera.